Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. The most recent release in the Star Trek home video library is the Blu-ray of the Star Trek Short Treks. These are of course a series of short Star Trek films between I'd say 8 and 15 minutes long that were put out in 2 seasons. The first season consisting of 4 episodes, the second consisting of 6. This Blu-ray does not contain all of the episodes, however. The final episode that was aired was Children of Mars, which is tied to Star Trek Picard. Presumably that episode will be released on the Star Trek Picard Blu-ray whenever it becomes available. One of the interesting things about the short treks is that they weren't released all around the world at the same time, more or less, like Discovery and Picard were. Outside of North America, the first batch of short treks was delayed by a few months, and the second batch was never released outside of this Blu-ray. So this set may be one of the first times that someone outside of North America can legally watch these films. I want to talk a little bit about the set, kind of give my review. I'm going to be going through it episode by episode and talking a bit about the special features. The episodes themselves, of course, I have done reviews of in the past. I'll link a playlist with all of those reviews in the description below and in a card on this video. So the first episode to be aired, and the first one on this set, is Runaway. This is set sometime after Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery. Interestingly, we still don't know exactly when this episode falls. Tilly is an ensign in this episode, so it is after the finale of Season 1, but we're not sure where exactly it could fit in Season 2 or if it's in between the 2 seasons. There's not a lot of space, seeing as we go immediately from the Discovery meeting the Enterprise into Season 2, so not clear exactly where this episode fits. Interestingly, watching these episodes retrospectively has given added weight to them, especially given the role that the character Mihani Ikahalika Po in Discovery's second last episode of Season 2, Such Sweet Sorrow Part 1. As for special features, Runaway is one of only 2 episodes on this set that has a feature commentary. The commentary track for this one is Alex Kurtzman and Jenny Lumet, the writers of this episode, and there's some very interesting tidbits that we learn from this commentary. First of all, the origin of the short treks was apparently due to the fact that the visual effects for Season 2 were not delivered on time. So Kurtzman kind of had this idea of these short films to kind of bridge the gap, to make there less of a gap between when Star Trek would show up on CBS All Access and hopefully keep people subscribed over that period. Given the beginnings of this, it's really interesting that I feel like they've really become an interesting part of Star Trek in and of themselves. The fact that they've become really big on their own and branched out to places other than Discovery, I think is really great. I think it would be a real tragedy if we don't see more short treks, even though as of now there are still none really announced, but I really do hope they continue. There's some other great stories that come out of this commentary, such as the joy of finding Mary Wiseman, for example, to play Tilly at the beginning of Discovery, and also some interesting background on Yadi Grivera Prip, who played Poe in this episode. A great young actress, and there were some changes made to her character based on her casting, and I think it's a role she's really inhabited, both in this episode and, of course, when she shows up in Such Sweet Sorrow in Discovery. We also learned that the short treks were filmed at the same time as episodes of Season 2, often on the weekends in between scenes for that season, and that becomes very apparent, I think, in later episodes such as The Brightest Star, which was very obviously filmed at the same time as the Discovery episode where Saru returns to Kaminar. Also, according to the commentary, this episode was apparently screened in space by NASA, which is an interesting little piece of information. This episode, like most of the episodes on the disc, features a small featurette as well called Coming of Age. Coming of Age features interviews with the director Maya Vervillo, Mary Wiseman, who of course plays Sylvia Tilly, and Alex Kurtzman, the executive producer and one of the writers of this episode. The featurette itself is interesting, a little bit short. These featurettes are not very long, but some interesting insights, such as the idea behind the script being Tilly becoming the mentor for a character as opposed to a mentee as she's used to, and some interesting insights from the director as to how to tell a story in 5 short scenes as opposed to the usual format that directors would normally be used to. Apparently, she was directed to watch a number of short films to kind of prepare herself for directing this episode. And I think, of the Short Treks episodes, this one to me feels the most like a truncated episode as opposed to one that fits the format of the Short Treks very well. This one feels like it should have been longer. There were some scenes cut. It kind of suffers from that a little bit. But it was also their first one, and some learning steps towards the better ones that come later, I think. So all in all, interesting. Again, I'm sad that only 2 episodes have feature commentaries. I would have really liked for other episodes to have commentaries. That's a complaint that's going to come up a number of times in this video, I think. So yeah, from there, we'll move on to the second episode, Calypso. So Calypso is the episode that features the sentient AI aboard Discovery called Zora, and a person that is rescued from an escape pod named Craft. Craft is a reluctant warrior who is fighting an enemy called the Vidraish, which is very much a kind of mangling of Federation. According to this, the Discovery has been waiting for the return of her crew for almost 1,000 years. How this will fit into the story of Discovery going forward, we don't quite know yet if it actually will do that. But hopefully we find that out in season 3 or later at some point. This episode is still my favorite of the Short Treks, even after both seasons have aired. I just love the story. Michael Chabon really crafts an excellent story here, making great use of the Short Treks format. It's a beautiful story. I come to love Zora in this, and Craft, I think, is an amazing character as well. Everything in this episode makes me want to learn more about where it's set, when it's set, what exactly the situation is, and they give you just enough to really tantalize you. So top marks for this episode from me. No feature commentary on this one, which is unfortunate because I feel like this is the one that I have the most questions about, and I would love to see the writer, the director, anybody just kind of commenting on it scene by scene. So this one is really tragic that we don't have a feature commentary. However, there is a small featurette called Shall We Dance, which is definitely an interesting look behind the curtain of Calypso. It doesn't answer all of the questions that I wanted answered, but then again, I'm pretty greedy, so what can you do? Alex Kurtzman is one of the featured interviewees in this, and he likens Calypso to a kind of Twilight Zone episode, definitely a feel that I got from it as well. Olatunde Usunsanmi is also interviewed. He's the director of this episode, as is Michael Chabon, who was the writer. We learn that the inspiration for the episode was obviously taken from Odysseus, and the story very much follows a part of the Odyssey, where Odysseus falls under the care of Nymph, and Zora definitely fills that role in this episode. So it's interesting to get a little bit of insight as to where the story originated from. It's kind of stuff that we already knew, or a lot of people already knew watching the episode. It would have been nice to get a little bit more insight into some of the mysteries surrounding the episode, but I have a feeling they're still keeping that under wraps a little bit, and hopefully going to surprise us with where that goes in the future. The next episode on the set is The Brightest Star. This is the Saru prequel episode that shows his life on Kaminar before leaving the planet and joining Starfleet. This to me feels like the most allegorical of the Short Treks episodes. There's some great quotes in it that really kind of connect it to things that I've thought in my life and things that I see looking around the world. So for example, Saru's father, Aradar, says, "All of us has our place in this world, Saru." That kind of lesson that, know your place, know your role, and that sort of thing. And then Saru kind of reflecting on this and rebelling against it. So lines such as, how could this life be enough for them? In our life in this Western world, we have this expectation that, you get married, you have kids, you buy a house, you do all the things, check the checklist. Some lives, though, don't fit inside this box. And, some people are punished for not taking that exact path. So this felt very allegorical to me. And then the beauty in other lines too that just really stuck with me when Saru's sister says to him, "Look down every now and then. There's beauty there as well." I just love that line. I think it really resonates that, you know, even though you are dreaming of this better life, there's still great things to be discovered and seen at home. Look down every now and then. There's beauty there as well. You know, learn to appreciate what you have along with the dreams that you have for a better life. And then, of course, the closing line of the episode that just kills me every time. "I saw hope in the stars. It was stronger than fear, and I went toward it." This is a very close second to me to Calypso. I really, really enjoy this episode. Again, no feature commentary on this episode, but there is a short featurette called First Contact Kaminar. Interviewees in this featurette include Boyan Kim and Erica Leipold, the writers of this episode. Doug Jones also makes an appearance talking about the unexpectedness of some of the aspects of Saru's background and crafting the Kelpian race here. And we also get a bit of an interview with Michelle Yeoh, who says it was nice to play good Giorgio again, which I was definitely really happy to see in this episode as well. You know, we get a lot of mirror Giorgio in the second season, but to really see the Prime Universe good Giorgio again, I think was really special and a really nice touch in this episode. And finally, in this first set of 4 Short Treks episodes, we have The Escape Artist, starring Rainn Wilson as Harry Mudd, reprising his role. This is an interesting episode. It doesn't feature any other main characters from Discovery, kind of like Calypso didn't, other than Rainn Wilson. Rainn Wilson as Mudd is really the only character here that we've seen before. This cements, in my mind, Rainn Wilson as a genius. I do love him as Harry Mudd. Harry Mudd was an inclusion in Discovery that I was not really looking forward to when it was first announced, but I think Rainn Wilson really took that role and did something really interesting with it. This is another one where we're not sure exactly where it takes place. There's several theories here and there as to where in the Star Trek timeline it exactly takes place. We do know it's after his last appearance on Discovery because there's reference made to him penetrating a space whale. So, yeah, it's something I never thought would be said in Star Trek. But yeah, this episode was also written by Mike McMahon, which makes me wonder if it's similar in tone to what we're going to get in Lower Decks. Mike McMahon, of course, is the showrunner for Star Trek Lower Decks, the upcoming animated series. I'm hoping we get a trailer or something for that soon, by the way. That's kind of beside the point. Again, no commentary, but a short featurette called Covered in Mud. The entirety of this featurette only features interviews with Rainn Wilson, who is, of course, the star of this and the director. He also directed this episode. I was disappointed in this featurette, to be frank. I was really expecting, I just kind of assumed we'd hear from Mike McMahon. And, you know, I haven't really seen much from him Star Trek related as far as him speaking other than on Twitter or something like that. So I really wanted to see some interview with him, some insight about this episode from him. But unfortunately, it was all just Rainn Wilson talking about the episode, which was interesting. There's some interesting background stuff in how they were shooting some of the more complicated shots. For example, in the final scene where there's, you know, like a dozen Harry Mudd android replicas all walking around each other and stuff. Interesting stuff, but I wanted a little bit more into the creative aspects of the story and how it was written and where it came from. So definitely a bit of a disappointment there. Now we get into the second set of Short Treks episodes. These ones were aired after the second season of Discovery. So first off, we have Q&A, which features Ensign Spock's first day on the Enterprise. Interesting kind of pivotal piece of canon, basically showing his introduction to Number One and Captain Pike, which is pretty cool. This to me feels like a sort of preview of what we will get in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We see this dynamic on display here, kind of for the first time We didn't really even see it much in season 2, given the special circumstances that Spock and Pike found themselves in that season. We never saw this kind of triad on the Enterprise doing their thing, so this is pretty cool. I like the comparison of Number One and Spock. They're two characters who are very much alike. And the exploration of the awe that Spock has for Number One, I think, is a fun basis for this story. So this one also has no feature commentary, but there is a short featurette, again, called Ensign Spock's First Day. The interview for this is entirely with Michael Chabon, who talks about the process of writing this and the kind of personal things that it meant to him while he wrote it. He wrote it on a weekend away from working on Star Trek Picard, just before shooting started on the show, apparently. And you'll notice when you watch this episode that it's dedicated to his father. At this time, Michael Chabon's father was extremely ill, and Michael spent most of the time by his side in the hospital, at which point he was writing this episode. And he talks about how his father first introduced him to Star Trek, and so to have it kind of come full circle that here at the end of his life he's writing dialogue for Spock at his father's side. It's really touching, very moving. And there's also some great insight into where Una's kind of part in the story, Number One's part in the story, comes from, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, this is an interesting episode. It's kind of hit or miss for a lot of Star Trek fans. I really enjoyed this one. I like the character heavy moments and stuff. So I think this is a fun episode, and definitely some interesting insights into it in this featurette. The next episode in the set, of course, The Trouble with Edward, the infamous Tribble episode from Short Treks. This, to me, represents more than anything the introduction of H. John Benjamin to Star Trek. I'm a big fan of Archer and Bob's Burgers. It was really fun to see this actor in Star Trek playing this role, and just hearing that voice in a Star Trek setting, I think, was a lot of fun. I think it's a nice homage to The Trouble with Tribbles, and the idea of Tribbles gives us the origin of the fast breeding Tribbles that we see in that episode. For better or for worse, some people take issue with that. I enjoyed it. I thought it was mostly just a fun romp. Again, no feature commentary on this one, but a short featurette, again, called Here Comes Tribble. It was an interesting short featurette because the entire featurette was an interview with Mario Moreira, who is the property master, and the entire thing was about them making the Tribbles, basically. No more insight than that. This is another one that, again, this is a complaint I'm going to come back to again and again, but I would have absolutely loved a feature commentary on this. Just where some of these story choices came from and whose idea it was to kind of do that little end credit, after the end credit scene with the cereal and that stuff, which is nuts. Like, who thought of that? I thought it was hilarious, but who approved that? I have so many questions, but yeah, no, definitely lacking in the special features department on this one, I think. I do like seeing this one on the disc just because the very opening shot is this beautiful shot of the Enterprise coming out of warp and going face to face with the Cabot. And it's something that when I watch it on streaming services, for whatever reason, Crave, when I watch it, it starts low definition and then gets to high definition, and it's never at the perfect fidelity when it gets to this shot yet. So to be able to see that in high definition on a Blu-ray was beautiful. So that's mostly what I have to say about that episode. Next up, we have the episode Ask Not, and this is the episode that features a cadet having to hold Captain Pike at phaser point. And of course, by the end, spoiler alert, we find out it's all a simulation. Cadet Sidhu, played by Amrit Kaur, I think was a great addition to the Star Trek universe. I'm really kind of hoping we see her in Strange New Worlds. I think she was a nice, fresh-faced, young character, and just seeing things through her perspective here was really interesting. This is the shortest of the Short Treks episodes, besides maybe the animated ones. I didn't actually look at the times of those. But it's also the first one to feature a cold open, which is interesting. We don't get the titles right away. We just get a cold open and then a title come up and then back into the action. Not sure why that choice was made, but I feel it really works for this episode. It's very much a two-person play. It's Pike playing off of this cadet. This is the second of the 2 episodes on this set that have a feature commentary. The commentary is only Anson Mount by himself, which makes for an interesting perspective. And he talks a lot about how they shot the scenes and what it was like wearing the mask that he wears at the beginning, insights into the performance, kind of defining the space of the set. I thought it was an interesting commentary. It was really great to get his insights. And one of the biggest revelations from this commentary was that the entire scene of them in that room had to be reshot 6 weeks after they initially shot it. Because the smoke was overdone the first time around, they felt, so they had to reshoot it. But there's some definite interesting insights from this commentary, such as how and where they shot the engineering scene, for example. What's interesting, of course, is that Anson Mount would have recorded this commentary well before the Strange New Worlds series was officially announced. And I think it would have been interesting if this set had come out before the announcement of Strange New Worlds, because he ends the commentary with this line. He says, "I look forward to talking to you in the future. We'll see. Take care." I think what a great little tease that a Pike series might be coming. Of course, now we do know that it is. But yeah, definitely worth listening to the commentary for this episode. It's great stuff. There's interestingly no short featurette with this. It's the only episode to not have a little featurette attached to it. So just the commentary for that one. And finally, we come to the 2 animated Short Treks episodes. The first one, Ephraim Dot. This was directed by Michael Giacchino and written by Anthony Marinville and Chris Silvestri. Now, because it's directed by Michael Giacchino, the music plays a huge role in this episode, of course. The score, I think, is incredible, kind of evoking those classic Star Trek themes. This episode features the tardigrade kind of making its way through the original Enterprise's NCC 1701's history, and it lays a number of eggs in the engine room of the Enterprise until its destruction in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. So definitely a great homage to the history of the original Star Trek. There's no feature commentary on this, but there is a short featurette, of course, called Score. And the interviewees in it are Anthony Marinville and Chris Silvestri, the writers, and of course Michael Giacchino, the director. Kind of talking about how he became involved in the project and how to tell the story mostly with music. So this was an interesting little featurette, an interesting insight into this episode as well. So don't skip them. I feel like they're geared towards kids, these animated ones, but don't overlook them. I think they're a definitely unique and interesting addition to the Star Trek universe here. Which brings us to the final episode on the set, which is The Girl Who Made the Stars. This is, of course, an elaboration of the story that Burnham tells at the very beginning of episode 201, Brother, the first episode of Discovery Season 2. It tells the story of Michael Burnham being scared of the dark and her dad telling her the story of the first people of Africa and the girl who made the stars. And it's really interesting, very unique for Star Trek, but a lot of fun. There's a featurette on this one called Bedtime Stories, featuring Brandon Schultz, the writer, and Olatunde Osunsanmi, the director. Kenrick Green also is interviewed in this. He plays Mike Burnham, and interestingly enough, he's also the husband of Sinequa Martin Green, who plays Michael Burnham in Discovery. Brandon Schultz tells a bit about the origin of the story. Originally was going to be a part of season 2 included at some point, but ended up becoming this animated short trek, which I think is really cool. And that's it for the episodes. The final thing on the set is, interestingly, the thing that I was most looking forward to, but ended up kind of being the most disappointed by, unfortunately, I have to say, which is a short featurette, a very short featurette called The Making of Short Treks. I was really excited for this one to kind of get really behind the scenes of the whole concept of the short treks and maybe some insight into what might be coming and that sort of thing. However, it ended up being very short, and I think is kind of made up of this clipped bits of interviews that went into the individual episode featurettes. So the interviewees in this are Heather Caden, executive producer, Alex Kurtzman, executive producer, Boyan Kim, one of the writers of The Brightest Star, Trevor Roth, an executive producer, and Rainn Wilson, of course, the director and star of the Harry Mudd short trek. There are a few insights into this, how it was the brainchild of Alex Kurtzman and a bit of an experimental playground for writers and directors, but it definitely lacked the depth that I was hoping that this would provide, and really kind of played out more as an extended trailer for the short treks. There are a lot of clips from the short treks used in this, and of course I had just spent the entire day watching all of the short treks episodes for this review, so it was very redundant. I had seen all these a number of times already. Of course, a bunch of them were clipped, of course, in the featurettes for the episodes as well, so that was a bit frustrating. However, that said, the set as a whole, I do have to recommend Star Trek fans pick this up. I think it's an excellent addition to the Star Trek library. I think maybe these stories aren't necessarily essential. However, they are very unique and a really fun playground for Star Trek in bringing stories in a way that has never really been done in Star Trek before. So I would definitely recommend picking this up. The featurettes, while short, are interesting and do give some insight. For the super Star Trek fan, I think this information is well worth the price tag for this disc. And of course, for those of you outside North America who have maybe not seen at least the second batch of Short Treks episodes, this might be the only way to really get your hands on those. So definitely worth picking them up. I really appreciate the work that went into these and the unique place that they hold in the Star Trek legacy. So yeah, highly recommended from me. But I want to hear from everyone out there. Have you picked up these sets? Or if you haven't, are you planning on it? Let me know in the comments below. What's your favorite episode of Short Treks also? And do you want to see them continue in the future? Thank you all so much for watching, and thanks especially, of course, to the Patreon supporters for your help in bringing these videos to you. I really do appreciate it. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, as always, live long and prosper.